Hey guys, I'm Mitch Maley and welcome to another edition of Punk Rock Politics. In the second and final presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Trump said some very curious things about how he plans to fix the Affordable Care Act, the signature legislation of his predecessor, President Obama, which he's been hell-bent on dismantling since even before taking office. Republicans have been obsessed with repealing the program known as Obamacare since it was signed into law in 2010. Their biggest roadblock, however, has been the program's popularity with the millions of people that were able to get health insurance coverage as a result of the law. People like those with pre-existing conditions who had often been unable to get approved for coverage if they did not have access to a group plan through an employer, or families with a child under 25 that is still at home and does not have insurance through their employer and could remain on their parents' plan, both of which were mandated by the ACA. Once the GOP realized this was an issue, they promised to instead use a strategy of repeal and replace, replacing it with something they promised would be both cheaper and better. 10 years later, however, neither the party nor the president has released any kind of replacement proposal. They've merely focused on the repeal side of the equation. To this end, they've largely taken a death by a thousand paper cuts strategy. On the same day the ACA was signed into law, 14 Republican state attorney generals began the process of challenging the law's individual mandate in the courts. A total of 26 states eventually joined in the lawsuit, which went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. The court upheld the legality of the individual mandate, but ruled that the federal government could not withhold Medicaid funding from states that didn't expand the program, making expansion optional. For political reasons, most Republican governors turned down the federal money that would have helped those struggling without coverage in their states, the vast majority of whom were at or below the poverty level and couldn't afford coverage on the exchange, the very reason for the expansion of Medicaid. Once elected, Trump then cut funding meant to market coverage on healthcare.gov, the federal exchange, which was being used by many states that chose not to set up their own, while 17 Republican-run states passed laws that inhibited the ability of ACA navigators to assist the public in navigating the exchange system in order to get their coverage. Another Supreme Court lawsuit ruled that premium subsidies could not legally be used in states that didn't create their own exchanges, making plans more expensive for consumers. Demonstrating the pure political nature of these suits, Indiana, Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, Nebraska, South Carolina, and West Virginia all joined amicus briefs in support of that decision, even though they themselves used the federal exchange and would therefore be hurting their own most vulnerable citizens. And while all of this was happening, Republicans still offered no replacement plan for the program they were dismantling. In 2018, the Trump administration ended funding for a component known as cost-sharing reductions, or CSRs, that protected insurers from losing money because of mandates in the law, preventing them from passing on costs to consumers or pulling out of the AC marketplace altogether, which was the point. President Trump kept reiterating his confused campaign promise to simply lower prices by allowing insurance companies to sell plans across state lines, which he said would reduce costs. This refers to state requirements that plans receive approval at the state level to ensure that they comply with that state's regulations. But the industry wasn't asking for that change, and the state level regulations are there to prevent companies from setting up shop in a state with lax regulations, making it easier for individual plans offering poor and deceptive coverage to be marketed in states with more stringent ones. And it should be known that there are a lot of shady insurance plans on the market that offer what seem like a too good to be true value until the policyholder tries to use it and discovers the giant gaping gaps in coverage or litany of exclusions to coverage that exist in its fine print. Trump's only coherent strategy was apparently to allow garbage plans to proliferate so that he could say he lowered the cost of health insurance without actually solving anyone's problems and probably creating a lot of new ones for unfortunate consumers. But even that didn't happen. The Trump administration simply continued its focus on the individual mandate, which Republicans had been fighting since day one. Considering that, You might be surprised to know that the individual mandate, which requires those who make enough income and are not enrolled in the group plan through an employer or the government to purchase a policy on the open market or be subject to an IRS penalty, was a Republican idea. That's right. It comes straight from the Heritage Foundation, a conservative policy think tank, and it was originally championed by former House Speaker and world-class blowhard Newt Gingrich. It was a cornerstone of Romneycare, named for the similar program that then Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney administered in his state, which the ACA is actually based on. Back then, Republicans argued that it was a matter of personal responsibility and justified it by pointing out that you were required to purchase auto insurance if you wanted to drive. It was only once the concept became part of a Democrat-authored plan that they revolted. And that is what makes Trump's current promise to offer something better and cheaper that still includes all the popular parts of Obamacare so hollow. The hard part about health insurance is that most people only want to pay for it when they need it most. Without young and healthy people who create fewer claims, offsetting risk in the pool, the cost of coverage for older and less healthy individuals goes up drastically. That was the whole purpose of the exchanges. Americans who receive their insurance through an employee-sponsored benefit plan benefit from risk being spread out over a large pool. When an insurance company underwrites a plan for a company with, say, 300 employees, the costs are infinitely more predictable to them than a single individual or a family of 5. And because of the law of large numbers, the margin of error that needs to be baked in only goes down as the group gets larger, which is why large corporations and state and federal governments can offer benefit-rich plans at very favorable rates, while it's much more costly for, say, a small business with 5 employees. The ACA proposed that if you could essentially create similarly large pools of what would otherwise be individual plans, you could create the same dynamic. And because of the individual mandate, those pools would be much less likely to be reflective of traditional individual plan markets that are typically overrepresented by those at higher risk, usually because of pre-existing conditions like diabetes, hypertension, or heart disease. So, the idea that you can get rid of the individual mandate, cost-sharing subsidies, and other mechanisms meant to keep the cost to insurers lower and still require that they take everyone, regardless of their health risks, and do it in a way that they can sell plans for less than they are right now is 100% pure political horseshit. Whether or not Trump understands any of this is unclear, but it explains why we haven't seen his so-called plan on paper in the 4 years he's been in office. More to the point, his administration is in the Supreme Court right now, once again trying to get the entire Affordable Care Act declared unconstitutional in a case that's scheduled to go to oral arguments just days after the election, and in front of a very pro-corporate court that just confirmed another far-right corporatist justice, which you can learn more about in the in-video link at the end of this episode. If President Trump has a plan for what he'd replace the ACA with, we haven't seen it. But the notion that it would even resemble the cost and benefit scenario he describes is simply divorced from objective reality, suggesting that like so many other issues that come before his administration, he still doesn't understand how it works. That's it for this episode. I'm Mitch Maley, and remember, you can always get more at punkrockpolitics.com. Thanks for watching, guys.